My name is Nicole Hollinsworth and I'm with TrustPoint Hospital. We're here with Dr. Andrew Pierce, one of our board-certified psychiatrists, to talk about the recent storm in Nashville. Thank you for being here with us, Dr. Pierce, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you, Nicole. So, as mentioned, I'm Dr. Andrew Pierce. I work both inpatient and outpatient as an adult psychiatrist, and my hope is that this video can help provide a little bit of information and maybe guidance or maybe a touch of solace for those here in my community who have been impacted by the recent tornadoes. I think it's very important that each of us do what we can with the skills that we have to give back, and this is my small contribution to that.
All right, well, thank you, Dr. Pierce. So let's get started. What is a common reaction for someone who has gone through a natural disaster such as these tornadoes?
That's an excellent question. On one level, the time period really matters. In the first day to a couple of days after the storm is very much about the immediate needs of the individual. Food, shelter, water, clean clothes, support, right? Identifying where loved ones are and how they've been impacted. The immediate aftermath of a direct impact like something as severe as this tornado really starts with survival, and moving forward. Now, there are obviously very intense emotional reactions in those first couple of days. Those can oftentimes persist even beyond the point in which the basic necessities of life have been accounted for. Those reactions fall into a couple of main categories, one of which is anxiety or fear. This is the most common or prevalent reaction. A person is worrying excessively, is restless, is unable to sleep, is very much on guard. It's like a person's fight or flight instinct has been locked into place. Even though the threat of the storm is gone, that surge is still present. And so anxiety and fear is a major response reaction to such a natural disaster. Other reactions do exist though, one of which is depression. A person may actually be more despondent or sad, to an excessive degree. Now, this is separated from grief in its intensity and some other aspects we'll talk about in a bit, but that depression can lead a person to have very low motivation, low energy, really struggle to connect with the services that are there to support them. And that can be very severe to the point where a person experiences excessive guilt, maybe even blaming themselves for aspects of what's happened, or even hopelessness. Now, less common, but still important to understand for those of us who are trying to help in such a time is that some folks may respond with aggression. An individual may be irritable, may be even at times hostile, generally upset, angry with what's happened, not only at themselves or others around them, but at the world at large for what they've experienced. And that can be very challenging as it may disrupt support givers or responders' attempts to help them. And so we have to be very aware of that is a natural and an okay way to respond to something like this, but we do need to make strides to improve it. The fourth most common way a person might react to being in such a natural disaster we call dissociation. So a person may feel extremely detached, maybe from themselves, feel like they're separate from themselves, going through the motions, maybe even feel like they're watching themselves go through the motions of this recovery. A person may also feel like they're detached from the world, that they're separate, that they're no longer a part of that community or group that's trying to help them. And, as you can imagine, this can be, very distressing. Now, a person, directly or indirectly impacted by these storms may experience some aspect of all of these emotions, or emotional categories. But that's a little overview of what a person might experience.
Okay. What symptoms can commonly occur in an individual after suffering from a storm like this?
Another excellent question. Those emotional responses sometimes advance, to a more clinical scenario where a person is experiencing things like hypervigilance, so very much on guard, unable to let that down, constantly on the lookout for problems, challenge, harm in some way. A person may experience severe nightmares. These may have common themes associated with their direct experiences, though not necessarily. A person may experience avoidance, where they either actively or sort of subconsciously try to avoid reminders of what's occurred. So it may be very difficult for them to be exposed to media about the storm, right? It may even be challenging for them to engage with others and communicate about what experiences they've had. These don't have to be external cues, they can also be internal. A person can just start to remember or have even an intrusive thought, a thought that comes in aggressively and a person's unable to push out about this storm or some of the events secondarily to the storm. At the same token, a person may have intrusive thoughts to the degree that they actually re-experience some of the things that they've been through, to the point that a flashback may occur and a person feels like they're back in that moment. And so those are some of the more prominent symptoms that we might see from a trauma response to a storm like this, though those aspects of anxiety and depression, fear, dissociation are all also possible as well.
Okay. So does someone have to be directly impacted by the storm to have an emotional response?
It's a really important question. The degree to which a person is engaged with the storm or impacted by the storm does typically have an impact on how they will respond. And so those individuals who were directly experiencing the storm, whose homes were hit while they were there, who had damage that they experienced, high winds, the direct experience with the storm, are at the greatest risk of having emotional challenges, not only because of their loss of property or potentially life of those with them, but because of their experience, that trauma itself. Now, there are other levels or degrees to which people experience trauma as well. So for example, a person who's indirectly affected might live a street over from a neighbor whose home was lost, or potentially even life lost in that home. That person absolutely may have an emotional response, reaction, maybe even to a significant degree to the things that have occurred. As we continue to zoom out, individuals who maybe weren't close to what occurred, close to the storm, but had loved ones, close friends, community members that they were connected with who were impacted, may also experience some emotions connected with that trauma as well. We also have to think about those who maybe weren't here but that had family members who were lost in that storm. That can also create grief, but grief can sometimes go further than the normal response and become a trauma-related response. Now, one special group of individuals that I think it's important to mention is first responders and those individuals who will be connected to the cleanup going forward. Whether or not directly impacted, that repetitive engagement with the ravages of this storm, and potentially, quite intense tasks that they're assigned as first responders can create their own kind of emotional impact. And so that is a group of individuals that I think it's important that we be mindful of as well. And so, in short, there is a gradient. Those who are directly impacted are more likely to respond intensely, but that does not mean that other folks on down that gradient will not have a response to.
Okay. Will some people have a harder time recognizing these reactions as an emotional response?
I'm glad you asked that question, because I do think this happens more often than we realize. Folks are traumatized. The very nature of it makes it hard to do anything besides try to just complete the basics of our day and of our life. And oftentimes those are, very important aspects or tasks that we don't have time to think about what our emotional state is. We're moving forward step by step as best we can. And so, I know for a fact that my neighbors in this area are tough, but sometimes that toughness shields us, blocks us out from how we're doing emotionally. So it's important to step back and check in with yourself, but also check in with those people who are around you, loved ones, children, other folks who might have been impacted by the storm, and know that part of the recovery is getting well physically, part of the recovery is getting well economically, part of the recovery is being okay emotionally. And so making sure that you take time to inventory how you're feeling, how you're reacting, how you're responding is important, because you may not see it. You may not feel it. You may have to take your steps to help others recognize it. And that can be done compassionately. That can be done gently. but it needs to be done for people to be as well as they can be.
What are some long-term effects that could occur because of this type of trauma?
Emotionally, the most, prevalent or maybe important for us to talk about long-term implication is the development of post-traumatic stress disorder. And so we oftentimes think about veterans, individuals who have been in combat, or folks who have undergone near-death experiences or sexual assaults, traumas of that personal nature, to be the potential folks who would develop PTSD. That absolutely can be a ramification of being in a natural disaster or tornado like the ones that we had here. So PTSD is a syndrome marked by hypervigilance, that excessive looking out for danger, avoidance, intrusive memories, and flashbacks and nightmares. And so that can occur, after a trauma, right? And we would consider if things are still functioning, still happening a month after the storm, that you should really consider whether or not that is the case. It is possible, though less rare, for a person to have delayed onset. And so even if those symptoms aren't prevalent initially, they may show up later in time, and you should remain on the lookout for them. And so post-traumatic stress disorder, I think, is the most prevalent, most important long-term ramification emotionally for going through something like a tornado.
Can a reaction to a storm like this be different for children?
Absolutely. Children are not just tiny adults. They have their own responses to what's happening. They are also, depending on the level of connection, the level of direct impact by the storm, may respond differently. So young men and women who were there for the events may very much respond with that anxiety or fear or depressive or agitated aggressive or dissociative type responses that we spoke about earlier. The challenging thing with children is they often lack the emotional vocabulary to tell us these things. They might not be able to communicate to their caregivers, their loved ones, their teachers, the people that care for them, how they're feeling. They may just not be able to do it. And so those of us charged with caring for them have to be on the lookout for these signs. Common ways that a child may express this, emotional challenges is in play. And so pay attention to how your children are playing. What kind of activities are they, using to express themselves, right? Is, a young man smashing cars, right? Smashing the little buildings that he plays with, or blocks, right? Playing in an aggressive or hostile manner. Are they acting out? Are they no longer able to play with other children to the success that they were before? Do you see them changing personality-wise? Were they before very friendly and boisterous, now going, and now very withdrawn? So look for those changes, and remember that children may not be able to tell us. Whether we ask them directly or pay attention to what they're saying, it may be their actions that are important. Now, on that same token, it's important that we do the things that we need to do for our kids to help them feel safe after experiencing a storm like this, or being connected to a person who experienced a storm like this, even just being exposed to the damage that it brought, even if they themselves were not directly impacted. A young person may be very attached, right? They may be very afraid that they're going to lose the things that they love after something like this. So it's our job to provide them with security, stability, routine, as much normalcy as can be mustered in a time like this. And that will be different based on your circumstances. But sometimes even the basics of getting up at the same time, going to bed at the same time, trying to have 3 meals each day, and being as connected as possible during this time can be positive for a child. Just like adults, be on the lookout for symptoms that are not resolving, are excessive, or are really worrisome to you. And if you feel like you think to yourself, I think this child needs some help, then they most likely do. And so if you find those thoughts crossing your mind, please reach out. Connect, with the service organizations around you, mental health in the greater Middle Tennessee area, or online, to get those kids that help that they need. Okay.
On that token, how can we show up emotionally for those that are affected?
That's a great question. There are many ways that you can show up. Some ways are not emotional, some ways are financial, if that's something that you have the means to do. consider donating to an organization that is going to help put that money into the right hands, the hands of people that need it. You know, if you don't have the money but you have the time and physical ability, think about heading over to the site. You know, people need, you know, hands. They need help. They need, you know, cleanup crews. They need to help put their life back together. And, you know, providing those things helps give you an avenue to provide some emotional support to. You know, sometimes people's needs are different. And so whenever approaching or having that opportunity, keep in mind that a person may not react as you would. They may react in a different way. But that having an open heart and an open mind and trying to foster that connection is important. You don't know what little gesture might make a big difference for a person who's been impacted. So be ready to allow a person to tell you their story if that's something that they're able to do. Try to help a person navigate the decisions ahead of them. You know, when going through this trauma, you're not operating at 100% because of the stress, and now you're being asked to make very important large-scale decisions or connect with relief organizations. Try to help a person navigate that. You know, they may need assistance, even though on any other day they would have been able to do it no problem. And so the best ways we can connect emotionally is by being there. You know, consistency, approachability. You know, when going into it with kindness and openness, there's no wrong way to help a person emotionally.
Okay. And what are some signs we should be on the lookout for to know when it's time to seek out that care?
It's so important. You know, sometimes these expected reactions, I don't want to say normal, but expected reactions can progress to the point that they actually become quite serious. And so if a person is ever considering things like suicidal thoughts or homicidal thoughts, they feel like they're losing touch with reality or are no longer taking care of themselves, they're not eating, they're not showering, you know, as their means allow. These are reasons that they really should consider contacting emergency personnel, maybe even considering going to a hospital. Now, sometimes things are in a place that are very impairing without quite reaching that level. A person can consider getting with a psychiatrist, a therapist, a counselor of some sort. And those kind of feelings would be about hopelessness. Do you feel like you're never going to get better no matter how much effort or energy or time goes by? Your life will never be worth it. You know, are you thinking that things would be easier if you just didn't wake up one day? Not that you would actually hurt yourself, but that you know would be a better way for you. And are you able to connect with your loved ones? Are you withdrawing to the degree, you know, that you're really suffering? You know, the simplest way to think about it is if you think to yourself or have someone that really cares about you say, I think it's time to get some help, then it is time to get some help. You know, take those moments, take those comments, take those feelings that you're having seriously and reach out. You know, connect with people in the community. Clergy are often, you know, spiritual leaders are often able to get you in contact with people who can help. Get online, you know, and type in, I need help, you know, because of this storm, and resources are there. But you do have to take that time to reach out and grab it. It's very important.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Pierce, for taking the time to sit down with us and answer these really important questions.
The pleasure is mine. I hope, you know, this interview finds people who, you know, maybe need to hear it in this moment. And as a person who's here, you know, in this community, you know, I want those who see it to know that everybody here still believes in Nashville.
Thank you.